Good evening, everyone. I'm Leah Cooper with your JCN News for this Thursday, October 29th. Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis yesterday suggested that we get used to cycles of tightening and loosening of restrictions, hence announcing changes to lockdown measures for New Providence, Abaco, and Grand Bahama.
Effective Friday, the 30th day of October, at 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., weekday curfew will apply to New Providence, Abaco, and to Grand Bahama. What that means is the curfew that presently exists in New Providence, commencing at 7 o'clock, will commence at 8 o'clock instead. And that in Grand Bahama, that commence at 10 o'clock, will likewise commence at 8 p.m. We want to, as quickly as possible, address any community spread on Grand Bahama.
Also on Grand Bahama, weddings and funerals are now limited to only 10 people. However, that does not include the officiants. Here's what else the Prime Minister says regarding relaxation of restrictions.
All beaches and parks on New Providence and Abaco may open effective Monday, November 2nd. That is Monday through Friday. The beaches will remain closed on Saturday and Sunday. Groups are limited to 5 individuals, and the COVID-19 enforcement unit will heavily monitor both beaches and parks. For the construction industry, companies on islands under 24-hour curfew may apply to the competent authority for permission to operate over the weekend.
Dr. Minnis stressed that weekend lockdowns remain in effect for New Providence and Abaco, with the exception of the operation of food stores on Saturday for Abaco. Now, with an increase in COVID-19 related activity on Eleuthera, Spanish Wells, and Harbor Island, Dr. Minnis says the Ministry of Health will be dispatching an emergency team to assess the situation. Following the assessment, a determination of what measures may be needed will be made. The Prime Minister says all indications are that the pandemic will be with us well into next year, adding the message of physical distancing, avoiding mass gatherings, mask wearing, and regular hand washing and sanitizing must be incorporated in the public health message and into everyday lives. Other measures outlined in the number 8 emergency orders for New Providence and Abaco remain in place.
PLP lives in an Alice in Wonderland of fantasies. They must stop using politics and one day face realities. We will do whatever is necessary to ensure the safety and survival of our fellow citizens.
That's what the Prime Minister said when asked if the government would consider free mass testing for COVID-19 throughout the Bahamas for those who can't afford it. Dr. Minnis dismissed the queries during his press conference yesterday. Now, the opposition has continuously called on the government to implement free widespread COVID-19 testing to break the chains of transmission. Dr. Minnis adds that Princess Margaret Hospital patients are not being charged for the COVID-19 tests. Therefore, there is some level of free testing going on at the hospital. Well, shortly after the Prime Minister's comments, opposition leader Philip Davis said in a statement sent via WhatsApp, Mr. Davis defended his position, saying that many countries offer free testing, including Turks and Caicos. He contends that a successful COVID policy requires a government dedicated to finding and isolating the virus through expanded testing, that the current weak testing policy means too many cases go undiagnosed. The opposition leader is urging the Prime Minister to get it together, as he says too much is at stake. With the reopening date for the tourism sector on the horizon, health consultant for the COVID-19 task force, Dr. Mercelin Dalregis, says that health officials are anticipating an increase in the number of new COVID-19 cases, but says we can still slow the transmission of the virus.
The data show our cultural behaviors are also increasing the spread of COVID-19. Our cultural behaviors often involve congregating in larger than 10 gatherings, larger than 6 at parties, churches, and mainly the fellowship after church, family get-togethers at the beach, weddings, funerals, and places like the fish fry. We've had 136 deaths. Such cultural behavior may prove quite deadly. So let us be safe and do our part to stop the spread of COVID-19 in the Bahamas.
Dr. Del Regis stated that as the holiday season approaches, the public must begin to think about transitioning to a new way of interacting with others. She contends that restrictions alone will not work. Therefore, each individual must take personal responsibility and follow the preventative health measures to slow and stop the spread of COVID-19.
For COVID-19. This virus is highly transmissible. Its favorite host is you. It takes every opportunity you give it to infect you. The pandemic is not over. There is no cure. There is no vaccine. Experimental therapeutic medicines are not readily accessible and available to the general public. We must consistently apply the public health measures that we already know work.
The former CMO noted that 40% of persons who have COVID-19 are asymptomatic, again pleading with the public to follow health protocols. A police-involved shooting on Exuma last night leaves a man dead and a police officer relieved of his duties. Police press liaison Assistant Superintendent Audley Peters in his morning report says police are investigating the circumstances surrounding that shooting, which occurred shortly after 9 last night. Reports say that the male victim was transported to the Exuma Medical Facility to be treated after the incident. Air ambulance was summoned to transport him to the capital. However, while at the Exuma International Airport awaiting transport sometime around 11 p.m., the victim succumbed to his injuries. The officer involved has been relieved of his duties and is assisting police with the investigation. Well, the Rastafarian community is speaking out off the heels of that police-involved shooting last evening. In fact, Royal Ambassador for the Ethiopia Black International Congress, Priest Rithman McKinney, says he's extremely disturbed by the video making its rounds on social media, showing the victim on the ground in a fetal position, bleeding out as the off-duty police officer forces a bag of marijuana out of his hands.
I almost guarantee if that were a white person, a white young man, was asked to give the bag of weed to the police and he refused, he was going to get shot. I am also sure that judges have sons who smoke cannabis. Politicians have sons who smoke cannabis. Police officers have sons who also smoke cannabis. And that's a young man that got gunned down in the street by an off-duty police officer. Where we get this self-hatred from? Why we hate ourselves? Why we hate our own? And these things have to be stopped. And I blame the Commissioner of Police, because I listened last week, 2 weeks ago, when he said they're intensifying the campaign against small amount of marijuana. And I was asking for a very long time, for the last 4 or 5 months, that the officers, the police department, use their discretion when it comes to young men and young women concerning giving them records.
His comments come 1 week after Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis admitted in the House of Assembly that the country's cannabis laws are outdated, adding that criminal records for those convicted of having small amounts of the substance will be expunged starting next year. Now, that officer has since been released from duty, and Priest McKinney says he's glad to hear that.
We in the Bahamas experience more brutality in the Bahamas than black person experience in America, where there's all kind of white officers. We have lone blacks officers here. And the oppressors, when they come upon you and they ask you any question, you try to open your mouth, they tell you shut up. You try to shut up, they slap you. They abuse you. So the victimization in this country from police officers is overwhelmed, and people being sick and tired. And this oppression from the police officer. Imagine a man being off duty. The young man, they don't recognize him as a police officer because he was off duty in his own plain clothes. So if the young man come against him or close to him with his two what I see come out of the young man hand after he shot him was something more than about a $10 bag. And if he decided don't come to you because you call him, you're going to take your revolver out and shoot him, and then say now you fear for your life. You have to do better than this.
Asked to respond to comments made by the Bahamas Christian Council earlier this week, opposing the idea of developing a hemp industry, Priest McKinney says this.
They speak against anything positive. The church has been oppressing the nation for a very long time, hold up colonialism and imperialism and dogma, concerning our liberation. So we are sick and tired of the Christian Council interfering with people with human rights and believe as though they have the answer for everything. Human rights belongs to all. The state, every man's fate is personal, and the state belongs to all of us. So they don't have the monopoly on the state to say how the law should go.
You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.
This segment of the news was brought to you by Alive.